Hello and welcome to the Carl Jackson Show, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, we've got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to dive in deep. Remember, Kamala Harris was at a North Carolina rally last month in Raleigh, North Carolina, ironically, and she talked about price gouging. That was one of the proposals before the debate. She talked about price gouging, and that didn't go well. And so her campaign said, shh, shh, they told her to be quiet, and they hid her away for a little bit, hid her until the debate or what have you. But that didn't bode well with anyone. Well, I've got our guest on. You've seen her on the program before, and I'm going to bring her back regularly. And she is Brianna Sagdahl. She is a senior writer and research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. And she's here. She wrote a column entitled "The Real Cost of Lower Food Prices: Separating Policy Fact from Kamala Harris's Political Rhetoric." And the reason why I brought Brianna on, I slip up sometimes and I call her Bri. All right. But the reason why I brought Brianna on is because Kamala Harris's plan is already being implemented. Farmers know about this. Brianna writes about this. I mean, she does a great job, a phenomenal job at beefnews.org. So, Bri, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show program.
Thank you so much for having me back on. Such an important topic.
Yes, it is, and it's pretty scary. Let me just give the viewers a quick overview of your column, and then I want to go point by point because you break this stuff down, and I'm just like, it blows me away. And it is a perfect example of yesterday or, a couple of days back, I had Ned Ryan on talking about his book, American Leviathan, and how the deep state, literally, these bureaucracies are taking over. And we don't live in this constitutional republic anymore. And that's happening with our food. But here's the overview that Brianna Sagdahl writes about. And that is, as Kamala Harris vows to tackle food costs, new USDA regulations quietly rewrite century-old laws, granting unprecedented power to government officials. Independent ranchers face crushing new rules, while the promise of lower prices hides the looming threat of shortages and skyrocketing grocery bills. Discover how these hidden changes could reshape America's food landscape. Okay, so you talk about how the Secretary of Agriculture, gentleman Tom Vilsack, is already implementing some of Harris's promises as president. Talk to us about what you mean here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carl. So the policies that Kamala is trying or attempting to address in her speech, and specifically the speech in Raleigh, North Carolina, I think is an attempt to either spin or make people potentially excited about these new regulations that Biden had previously proposed months ago. And so the USDA has been hard at work. In essentially what they're doing is they're jumping ahead of the courts. So I'll back up just a little bit. Okay. We had obviously empty shelves. We had a lot of issues through the pandemic. Market shocks really became abundantly clear to the American public. And we also had a lawsuit arise from JBS's, so the Pilgrim Pride, or their parent entity, which is JBS, a subsidiary of the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, for those who may not know. They were sued by the poultry growers in their tournament system. And now the Biden administration and the USDA it's almost as if they're attempting to jump in front of the courts to redefine these laws before the court comes down and really addresses how these administrative rulemaking and laws through the USDA have essentially created a unfair and discriminatory marketplace for livestock producers, and specifically within the tournament system itself.
Okay, so let me ask you this, and then I will ask you, Brianna. I will not be offended, but go ahead and speak to producer Gabe like he's a third grader. But I'm going to ask you some specific questions. Again, in this article, I am encouraging all of you guys, go to beefnews.org. Follow Brianna. She does excellent work. And this is stuff that, honestly, if you're not a farmer, you don't know about this, but obviously you love eating, right? So we're humans. This is stuff that we should know about. And this is, again, how the Leviathan, if you will, the American Leviathan, as Ned Ryan has called them, are literally trying to take over our lives, and consumers have no say, or voters have no say. You write this, Bree, and I want to make sure that I go point by point. You say the first promised regulation comes in the form of a comprehensive update to the USDA's definition of unfair and deceptive practices under the Packers and Stockyard Act of 1921. Briefly talk to us about what that means, because I'm literally going to go point by point here.
Fantastic. So the USDA is essentially attempting to turn a 103-year-old law into a consumer protection law. And the significance of this is outstanding. In 1921, we had 5 multinational processing corporations, or facility owners, if you will, and they owned, so 5 corporations owned about 81% of market access in the livestock industry. And so
meat processing plants, I'm sorry to interrupt, but meat processing plants, is that what they?
Meat processing, yes, livestock.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So how we get our product from the farm to the table, essentially. Okay. And so Congress decided to intervene. They created the first really antitrust law through the Packers and Stockyard Act. And it was an attempt to create broader access for producers and, make it more of a fair system, so that you didn't have these 5 companies own all of the packing yards, or the stockyards, and all of the packing and processing facilities, where they could then dictate the rules of the marketplace. So now you fast forward 103 years, and for all of those rulemaking, all of those laws, right, for all the good that it did, if you will, we now have just 4 multinational corporations who own 85% of market access. So it kind of backfired, if you will. But I digress. Point is, this was originally supposed to be an antitrust law, and now the USDA is attempting to turn this into a consumer protection law. And they're also doing some very interesting things. It's a little bit of co-opting the Federal Trade Commission Act, a little dash of imbuing the Secretary of Agriculture with the ability to mind read and determine intent, do a little bit of, future telling, if you will. But it's a whole lot of centralized control in the hands of just one individual, is really what it comes down to. And this is very concerning, because the Secretary of Agriculture will literally be able to intervene into the marketplace and bring about either challenges, allegations, lawsuits, even if there has not been a violation of the Packers and Stockyard Act. According to the new regulation, if it even appears that there might be harm to the marketplace, the Secretary of Agriculture can step in.
Okay, so let me put this in reverse. We have about a minute and a half left in this block. Bree's going to stay with us for another block or two if she can, because I really want to unpack this, because I want you to understand how all of this affects you, the average everyday American consumer, when you're going out to buy meat products, food products in general. I think this will impact you. But what Bree had mentioned was basically there's a monopoly with these meat processing plants. All of these small farmers, essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, Bree, have to go through these meat processing plants. You had this Packers and Stockyard Act, which essentially was created to make sure that there was no monopoly. It was an antitrust law, if you will. But now the industry is even more monopolistic. And now you have the federal government coming in under the Biden-Harris administration and actually trying to take even more power, centralize the whole meat industry, basically. And anybody that screws up, the little guy that screws up, is basically going to get punished. Is that too general? 30 seconds before we go to break, but obviously we're coming back.
That was beautifully stated, Carl. I couldn't have said it any better myself.
Man, well, I get it from your article, so I encourage you guys to read the article. All right, so good. Okay, so I just want to make sure that the average everyday American understands what's going on. These people, guys, I know this sounds crazy, but it isn't. We literally have Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have essentially been authoritarians. We cannot let this woman win the presidency. When we've got to make sure that we break up these institutions. More with Brianna Sagdahl when we get back. This is the Carl Jackson Show. Hey, Carl Jackson here for Priority Gold. Economists warn that massive tax hikes could devastate your IRA and your 401k account as the stock market braces for impact. With inflation on the rise and global uncertainty looming, it's clear why central banks and savvy Americans are turning to gold. In times like this, Proverbs 21:20 reminds us to preserve what we built. Right now, that wisdom points us towards gold. If you haven't had your eye on gold, it's time to make it a priority. Again, I'm Carl Jackson, and I'm urging you to call my friends at Priority Gold to find out how they can help you diversify your savings with both physical gold and silver. Call 1-800-405-GOLD or visit PriorityGold.com/golden for a free gold info guide. Plus, see if you qualify for free shipping and storage. Act now to get your portfolio working for you while the market is golden. Call 1-800-405-GOLD to speak with a gold specialist or visit PriorityGold.com/golden to learn more. That's 1-800-405-GOLD. Hey, Carl Jackson here. You've asked, and My Pillow has listened. They're finally bringing you the most requested offer ever. Right now, you can get the queen size premium My Pillow for just $19.98. My Pillow is made with a patented adjustable feel. It adjusts to your exact individual needs, regardless of your sleep position. It helps to keep your neck aligned, and it holds its shape all night long, so you get the best sleep of your life. But that's not all. You can get their 6-piece kitchen or bath towel sets for just $25. The brand new mattress topper for as low as $69.98, and their famous My Pillow bed sheets for as low as $25, and so much more. Go to mypillow.com or give them a call at 800-858-0263. Use the promo code Carl, that's CARL, I don't spell it like the communists, to get huge discounts on all My Pillow products, including the premium queen size My Pillow for just $19.98. That's the lowest price ever. Don't delay. Order today. Use promo code Carl at checkout. All right. Hello and welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, I'm joined by my guest, Brianna Sagdahl. She is with beefnews.org. She's a senior writer and research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. And she's talking to us about what the Biden-Harris administration is already doing in order to cause eventually what will cause shortages on food. They want to centralize the meat market, and that's exactly what they're doing now. They're working through the Department of Agriculture to do that. So we've been talking about that with Bree. She's written an excellent column at beefnews.org. It's called The Real Cost of Lower Food Prices, Separating Policy Fact from Kamala Harris's Political Rhetoric. And Bree, you've been telling us that all of this stuff that we're concerned about, when Kamala Harris mentioned that price gouging proposal, that wasn't something that was a Freudian slip. That wasn't something that she was just kind of testing in the market, if you will. This is something that behind the scenes, they're actually doing with farmers already, in a sense.
That's exactly right. They're already working on this. And, what's interesting is not only the fact that our entire industry has almost become completely centralized. But now they're trying to essentially remove those points of centralization. So not to decentralize it, of course, but just to eliminate it entirely. So in our previous segment, we were discussing how just 4 multinational corporations own 85% of market access. And what that really looks like on a daily basis is about 95% of our livestock and our meat supply go through just 5 processing plants across the United States. And then you have things like the EPA, for example, coming in, who and essentially they are now attempting to put in such drastic and draconian affluent wastewater limitation guidelines, it will see the closure of processing facilities. So when you begin to centralize any kind of industry, it really becomes easy to start picking it off. And that's ultimately the concern here in the livestock industry. And there's a bigger concern, obviously, because we consistently see objectives, goals, sustainable development goals, for example, UN agenda goals, that encourage us to eat less meat, to increase our soy uptake. And so, there's kind of a broader perspective to look at, if you will.
Okay, so now there are a total of 4 large meat processing plants that exist now. There used to be 5 over 100 years ago. But ironically, after the Packers and Stockyard Act that was meant to bust up the monopoly has gotten even worse. So they went from five to 4, which is totally insane and totally what government does, screws things up all the time. But so JBS, Tyson, is it called Cargill?
Mm-hmm. Cargill.
And Smithfield now own 85% of access to the meat market as subsidiaries to the USDA. So right now, there's basically a monopoly. The meat market is basically centralized. But you're saying the federal government under Kamala Harris, basically what she wants to do and what Biden and Harris has already been working on is, hey, why do we need these corporations, the federal government? We can just, we can centralize this. We can do all of this through the federal government. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Well, it'll definitely make it more difficult for these centralized monopolies to continue functioning. And, according to this administration, they have put in some stopgaps, if you will, and there's 2 of them. And the next point that we address in the article is that the Biden-Harris administration is attempting to not end the tournament system, which everybody in the industry agrees it's awful. But they're working on essentially creating a base rate payout for the tournament system. And then the next part, and
let me stop you just for a second.
Okay.
Bree, just quickly explain to the viewers,
sure,
what is the tournament system for those of us that aren't farmers? What does that mean?
So the tournament system was another interventionist strategy, if you will. And the idea was really to help these processing facilities stabilize their controls so that you could have lower food costs at the grocery store. And so they allowed for sort of a sharing of liability and cost between the producer and the processor, the packer. And what it looks like in reality is that a Tyson, for example, will contract out the growing of their poultry, for example. So They will deliver the chicks. They like to have their specific patented genetic line grown. They will deliver the feed, any kind of veterinary or medical care that the producer is allowed to use. And at the end of, that's when the animal is fully grown, then Tyson will come in, pick it up, and take it for processing. So the good thing is that for the producer, you have guaranteed access to the market. And for the packer, they have a guaranteed and consistent line of inventory.
Okay.
However, there have obviously been some very big issues and abuses within that system. And it's not only created sort of a bottleneck in the sense that there's a ton of pressure to grow bigger and larger birds on a shorter time scale. And consumers are naturally turned off by that. And they should be for good reason. But it's also, condensed their living conditions. It's just awful. Anyway, so not only that, right, but then there's also been some abuses on the processing and the side between the processor and the producer, where JBS and Pilgrim's Pride, for example, ended up doing some price setting scheme that ended up leaving the poultry growers out of significant amount of money. So the new attempt at solving this is a regulation that would create just a base rate. So you don't get any bonuses for better quality. You wouldn't have any kind of a bonus for growing a better product, using less feed, any of the metrics that were used previously. Now it's just going to be a base rate. So regardless of quality or size or health, everybody's just going to get paid the same now.
Wow. Okay. So specifically, how does this impact the individual farmer, the small farmer, and what does this look like for those of us that are buying chicken from the grocery store, whether it's Tyson chicken or whatever it may be from the grocery store? Are we getting a inferior product? What does that look like on small farmers and all the way to market for somebody like me that's going to go to the local grocery store to pick up my meat?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So it's going to end up pushing some of your really good poultry growers out of the industry. Essentially what it does is it allows government to dictate how our food supply should look like. But more than that, right, it really it places the incentive in all the wrong places. So we want to make sure that our animals are healthy, that they are, personally, I like to allow my birds to free range or pasture raise. So those options for a packer or a processing facility looking into more of a regenerative model or trying to buy or contract out with a different type of producer, for example, they wouldn't have any incentive to pay a little bit more for higher quality because everybody just gets a base rate. And that really goes back to the Packers and Stockyard Act as well. If a processing facility or a grocery store, for example, chose to go with a better quality of meat, we raise much better quality, much healthier beef here in the United States, for example. And so if a grocery store chain chose to go with a contract with a farmer like, say, Cole Bolton, K&C Cattle out of Texas, who has a superior genetic and beef line, they would almost be, they could be penalized for paying a higher amount for a better quality.
Unfreaking believable. We have a minute left in this segment. Bree, if I could, I'd like to keep you for one more segment. I'm speaking to Brianna Sagdahl. She is the senior writer and researcher or research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. You can find all of her writing at beefnews.org. Quickly, Brianna, where can people find you online, on social media?
You can find me at Brianna9 on X, Brianna Sagdahl on Facebook. And most importantly, you can find me at beefnews.org and knowyourcow.org.
All right. I like that. Know your cow. All right. All right. So we only have 30 seconds left. When we get back, here's what I'd like to tackle. Just quickly, we'll only have Bree for one more segment. I want to go through this Packers and Stockyard Act. There's a couple of more questions that I'd like to ask her. One thing that you write about, Bree, if you just want to be thinking on this, without exception, it is illegal in the U.S. to sell meat of any kind for interstate wholesale consumption or export unless permitted by a federal government stamp. You've talked briefly about that. I want to delve into that a little more, and then we'll get a little more in depth into the Packers and Stockyard Act. We'll be back with more on the other side. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, I'm speaking with my guest, Brianna Sagdahl of beefnews.org, senior writer and research fellow at the I Am Texas Slim Foundation. And again, at the Raleigh, North Carolina rally that Kamala Harris spoke at, last month, she mentioned price gouging with these grocery stores that only have 1.6%, 1.8% profit margins. Absolutely insane. These people will go out of business if the federal government attacks them. It's really insane considering places like Microsoft, Nvidia, and all of these major tech companies. Their profit margins are just insane, and I don't care, frankly. But it's shocking to me that they would want to go after the grocery industry. But what Brianna has been sharing with us is that basically this centralized control of our food system, of our foods, of our meat in particular, is already happening under the Biden Harris administration. And you have these major meat processing plants that's basically a centralized industry because you have to work through them as one of the small farmers. But now you have this Tom Vilsack of the Department of Agriculture that the Biden Harris administration and Kamala Harris wants to kind of take over this stuff. It's amazing. So here's some things that I want to speak to specifically that you've written about, Brianna. But before I do, you said something during the break that I think just the average everyday American needs to hear. Can you share that with us?
Well, sure, Carl. Just like us, we've had our gas prices increased, right? Gas might be down, but diesel's remained quite high. Just like most Americans, our feed costs have gone up, right? And so that increases all of our prices as the producer to bring any type of livestock or meat to market. It's the same with any kind of crop that we bring to market. We're taking a loss already as it is. So when you look at capping prices at the grocery store level, and then you factor in that the Secretary of Agriculture can slap a fine or a fee on a grocery store chain for buying a better quality of meat if it increases the cost at the grocery store level, right? In you realize it does nothing. It has no consideration. These regulations do not take into account, the increased cost of us, the producer.
So you guys could essentially be more small farmers essentially could be put out of business when they cap the costs in the marketplace. And then we, the consumer, will have less of a choice.
Well,
basically,
right
we'll be going through what. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That is the whole kit and caboodle right there. That's how you end up having higher costs. Because you don't have choice. That's how, without competition in the marketplace, you end up not only driving up the cost, but that's how you end up in other very dangerous situations. I don't want to get hyperbolic and say breadlines, but you get the idea.
Well, listen, I think we're headed there. And listen, I don't think it'll happen overnight, but obviously things are already put in place. You have this lady Kamala Harris, just lying about absolutely everything. This is a California left-wing radical. She's an authoritarian, and she's lying about all of her policy positions, which should scare the bejeebers out of you. Why doesn't she want to share the truth? Okay, so you say this, excuse me. Without exception, it is illegal in the U.S. to sell meat of any kind for interstate wholesale consumption or export unless permitted by a federal government stamp. Any processing facility, packaging for export, or grocery stores must be inspected by a full-time USDA certified inspector in order to receive that federal USDA certified stamp. I'd imagine that really slows down the process that farmers and the meat processing plant has to go through, because you specifically wrote about a full-time USDA certified. Is there any significance to that?
Well, right. So the packaging plant, the processing plant, has to be big enough. It has to have enough volume and enough income to absorb essentially, the salary of an employee that is not working for them, but working to certify the meat and certify the process in general. So, and then if you think about it, if you're a USDA certified inspector, you're going to want to go to a plant that can hire you and give you full-time hours. You're not going to want to bounce between small independent processing facilities and, have 2 days here and 2 days there.
Okay, Bree, let me read this to you real quick and just get your quick take. You write here under the Packers and Stockyard Act, starting with the redefinition of harm under the Packers and Stockyard Act, by claiming that, quote, the act is broader than an antitrust law, close quote. The USDA is currently attempting to turn the Packers and Stockyard Act into a consumer protection law for the public benefit. Additionally, the administration is attempting to imbue the Secretary of Agriculture with omnipotent future telling and mind reading power. So, and you even say, you write, despite the recent overturning of Chevron deference, the proposed regulations would also imbue the Secretary of Agriculture with the power to prevent, quote unquote, likely harm to congressional policy goals. So ultimately, it seems to me that what Kamala Harris would like to do is decide what's best for the consumers. These meat processing plants won't have that authority.
Certainly. I would say what's fair to assume by these regulations is that this administration would like the administrative state to have the sole and complete centralized authority to dictate how every industry operates. And this is not unlike 1930s fascism, where you had one sort of centralized regulatory body that oversaw the entire industry. And that's really where this is heading. Like we had touched on previously with that federal stamp required in order to buy any type of meat legally. The USDA certified stamp itself has really become the centralized bottleneck within our food chain. Without that stamp, I am not able to sell you beautifully processed and packaged just by our local locker meat. And I'll tell you, most of our lockers around our area, all of our butchers use the exact same regulations, guidelines, etc. But without that USDA certified stamp, it is illegal for me to sell you, my friends, my family, my neighbor, what we grow in our own backyard locally.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Wow. All right. That is huge. Now let me. Okay. So let me play devil's advocate. So somebody listening might say, well, there's a need to do that because we have to make sure that your products are safe.
Sure.
And the only what.
Okay. Yeah, of course, that's what you would imagine, right? Unfortunately, it has that label no longer even guarantees that your meat is coming from the United States. In the last 3.5 years, the United States has become a net importer of beef, and the USDA, APHIS, for example, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, which its parent company is or agency is the USDA, they just lifted a ban on chilled and frozen meat coming out of Paraguay. We banned meat from Paraguay because of foot and mouth disease. They just lifted that, even though the region is not free of foot and mouth disease. So that USDA certified stamp, all it's doing is certifying that the process and how things were processed meet specific regulations and guidelines.
Okay, this is unbelievable. We just have a minute left with you here, and again, I'm speaking to Brianna Sagdahl. Make sure you go out and read her stuff. Beefnews.org is where you can find her. That's the best place to find her. You close this column out with selectionism and protectionism. You say in 2021, Pilgrim Pride and its Brazilian-owned parent company, JBS, were sued by poultry farmers for violating this act. The case has brought the issue of centralization to the forefront, giving the Biden-Harris administration a scapegoat for high prices at the grocery store. 30 seconds to comment.
Yeah, I think that this is a really great thing to end on, because here's the deal. Well, politicians point to the big bad corporations. The truth is, our administrative state picks or selects those whom they will protect. So when regulations are created, but the the JBS and the Cargill and the Tysons of the world are not only selected for their ideological alignment and their large, sizable campaign donations to that particular administration, but then they're protected from the regulations that are being passed, does it really make sense to continue passing regulations that only end up impacting the independent farmer rancher?
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Brianna Sagdahl, thank you.